Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of North Carolina. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know the places and times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1862. The Civil War raged across America, tearing the nation apart, but in the small settlement of Theodosia, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina, a different kind of horror was unfolding. A horror that would leave 31 villagers dead in a single night, with only one survivor to tell the tale. The settlement of Theodosia was established in 1821, named after the daughter of a prominent landowner, Colonel Samuel Richardson. According to county records preserved in the Asheville Historical Society archives, Richardson acquired nearly 200 acres of land following service in the War of 1812. The official land grant documents describe the area as fertile valley land with abundant water access, surrounded by timber-rich hillsides. Richardson initially brought 12 families to settle the area, primarily from Virginia and Pennsylvania. By 1862, Theodosia had grown to a modest community of 38 residents comprising 11 households. It was built along the banks of what is now called Skinner Creek, surrounded by dense pine forests that seemed to swallow sound itself. The mountains cast long shadows over the valley, especially during the winter months, when darkness fell early and stayed until late morning. An 1857 survey map discovered in a courthouse basement in 1952 shows the layout of the settlement. The homes formed a rough semicircle around a central common area where a small church and general store stood. The Jensen family's grist mill was positioned downstream, utilizing the creek's natural flow for power. Behind the mill stood the communal smokehouse, where families would prepare meats for winter storage. According to county records, Theodosia's economy relied primarily on timber and the small grist mill, operated by the Jensen family. Most households maintained modest garden plots and livestock pens. Trade with neighboring settlements occurred monthly when weather permitted travel through the mountain passes. The isolation of the community was both a blessing and a curse. During the Civil War, it remained largely untouched by the conflict, but this same isolation would prove devastating when disaster struck. The sole survivor of the incident was Dr. Elias Whitaker, the town's physician who had settled there in 1857 after relocating from Pennsylvania. According to his personal correspondence with family members back east, preserved in the University of Pennsylvania archives, Whitaker sought the tranquility of mountain living and the opportunity to be the primary medical provider for a community in need. Prior to moving to Theodosia, he had practiced medicine in Philadelphia for 7 years, specializing in respiratory ailments. Whitaker's detailed journal, discovered during a survey of the area in 1952, provides the only first-hand account of what became known locally as the Theodosia affliction. The journal itself is a leather-bound volume with nearly 200 pages of meticulous handwriting. The paper has yellowed considerably, and several pages show water damage, but the text remains largely legible. It currently resides in a climate-controlled vault at the University of North Carolina's Special Collections. The journal begins with entries describing the ordinary life of a rural physician. Whitaker treated common ailments, broken bones, fevers, births, and occasional respiratory diseases, nothing unusual for a mountain community of that era. His notes detail the birth of Martha Jensen's twins in spring of 1862, Thomas Abernethy's broken leg from a timber accident that summer, and various cases of seasonal illness. One entry from September 1862 mentions, "The isolation of this community has its medical benefits. We have been spared the typhoid that reportedly affected Millbrook last month. No new cases of any significance this week, which affords me time to continue cataloging the local medicinal plants. The Cherokee remedies shared by Mrs. Blackwood have proven remarkably effective for treating joint inflammation." But the entry dated November 14, 1862, marks a stark change in tone The handwriting becomes more rushed, the ink blotched in places as if written in haste. "Something peculiar has come to Theodosia," Whitaker wrote. "Mrs. Abernathy complained of unusual symptoms this morning: severe headache, sensitivity to light, a rash unlike anything I've encountered. I initially suspected measles, but the pattern of the rash and the rapid onset suggest otherwise. The rash begins at the neck, spreading upward behind the ears and downward across the collarbones. Mrs. Abernathy described a sensation like insects crawling beneath the skin where the rash appears. Her temperature is significantly elevated. I've administered willow bark tea and advised cold compresses." The following day's entry notes no improvement in Mrs. Abernathy's condition and mentions that her husband, Thomas, had begun exhibiting similar symptoms. Whitaker's concern is evident in his writing. Thomas's case progresses more rapidly than his wife's. The rash appeared within hours of his first complaint of headache. Most concerning is his report of hearing whispers from the walls when no one else is present. I've observed no signs of delirium otherwise. His responses to questions remain lucid and appropriate. Within 3 days, 5 more villagers reported similar symptoms. Whitaker's journal becomes increasingly urgent with each entry. He describes how the afflicted would begin with what seemed like common cold symptoms, which rapidly progressed to fever, disorientation, and the distinctive rash that appeared on the neck and spread outward. November 18, 1862. I've written to medical colleagues in Asheville for consultation, but I fear help will not arrive in time. 13 villagers now show symptoms. The Peterson brothers are particularly affected. Their elderly mother tends to them constantly, though she herself now shows early signs of the affliction. I've instructed the unaffected families to avoid contact with the sick, though in our small community, isolation is nearly impossible. The Abernathy's condition has deteriorated severely. The rash now covers most of their visible skin, and both report constant sounds, like scratching or whispering, that no one else can hear. Most alarming is the blackening of their tongues and gums that began this morning. Whitaker's journal entry from November 19th contains the first mention of death. Sarah Abernathy passed at approximately 4 this morning. Thomas followed within the hour. The progression from first symptoms to death was just over 5 days. I performed a limited examination, constrained by my growing concern about contagion. The rash had spread to cover nearly their entire bodies, and the tissue beneath had begun to harden in a most unusual manner. Their final hours were marked by intense agitation, both attempting to claw at the floors and walls, as if trying to escape something visible only to them. What's particularly disturbing about Whitaker's account is the speed at which the affliction spread. Unlike typical epidemics that might take weeks to move through a community, whatever struck Theodosia worked with frightening efficiency. By November 20th, 22 villagers showed symptoms. Whitaker's journal entries become shorter, more fragmented, as he worked continuously to tend to the sick. Nov 20. No sleep for 2 days. Jensen family all bedridden now. Elder Richardson displaying advanced symptoms after only 36 hours. Fastest progression yet. Sent Michaels to Millbrook with urgent plea for medical assistance. He returned this evening, unable to cross Western Ridge due to early snowfall blocking the pass. We are alone. The county records indicate that no mail was delivered to or sent from Theodosia between November 19th and December 3rd, 1862. The regular postal writer, Timothy Gaines, reported in his log that he found the village eerily quiet when he arrived on November 26th. He did not dismount his horse, instead calling out from the village edge. When no one responded, he returned to the nearest outpost and reported the situation. According to Gaines's statement, preserved in the North Carolina State Archives, there wasn't a soul moving in that place. Smoke from only one chimney. The livestock was making a terrible noise, like they hadn't been tended to. Something wasn't right there. I've ridden that route for 7 years, and I never felt anything like it. The air itself seemed wrong somehow, had a thickness to it, like just before a lightning storm, but heavier. My horse refused to go further than the edge of the clearing. That animal has never balked before, not even during artillery fire last spring when we passed near a skirmish. But he wouldn't set foot in Theodosia that day, no matter how I urged him. Gaines' report was initially dismissed by his superiors as exaggeration, but when he refused to deliver to Theodosia the following week, citing illness, a substitute rider was dispatched. This second rider, James Cooper, returned with a similar account, adding that the animals were gone or dead and birds avoided the area entirely. Not a single crow or vulture, despite what smelled like death in the air. A small contingent from neighboring Millbrook was dispatched to investigate on December 2nd. What they found was documented in a report filed by Sheriff James Wilson, a document that remained sealed in county records until 1913, when restrictions on sensitive materials from the Civil War era were lifted. Upon arrival at approximately 2 o'clock, we discovered multiple deceased individuals in various locations throughout the settlement. Some were found in their beds, others had collapsed in the street or their yards. Preliminary count suggests 30 deceased persons. The condition of the bodies indicates they have been dead for several days. A peculiar rash was visible on all victims examined. Dr. Thomas Blackwood has advised against direct contact with the deceased. Most disturbing was the position of many bodies, found with fingers bloodied, as if they had been clawing at wooden floors or walls before death. Several homes showed unusual damage to interior walls, consistent with such activity. The report goes on to note that the sole survivor found was Dr. Whitaker, discovered in his home in a state of severe dehydration and delirium. He was immediately transported to Millbrook for treatment. Sheriff Wilson's report includes a final observation that was redacted from official copies, but appears in his personal journal, now held by his descendants. I have witnessed the aftermath of battles and of disease, but never have I seen expressions of terror like those frozen on the faces of Theodosia's dead. Whatever end they met, it was not peaceful. The most disturbing aspect of the incident was not merely the death toll, but the mystery surrounding what caused it. The affliction that struck Theodosia did not spread beyond its boundaries. Not a single case was reported in neighboring communities, despite the close commercial ties between settlements. Dr. Blackwood, who treated Whitaker in Millbrook, reported no symptoms among those who handled the bodies or transported the survivor. Dr. Whitaker's recovery was slow. He remained in Millbrook under the care of Dr. Blackwood for nearly 3 months. During this time, he filled 3 journals with his recollections and observations, attempting to make sense of what had happened. These journals, now preserved in the University of North Carolina's special collections, provide a harrowing window into the disaster. I've gone over it countless times, Whitaker wrote in January 1863. The symptoms do not align with any known disease. The rash begins at the neck, spreading in a pattern resembling branches. The fever burns hotter than any I've witnessed. The afflicted report hearing noises even when alone in silent rooms. And then, most disturbing of all, the blackening of the tongue and gums, occurring approximately 36 hours after the first symptoms appear. I've consulted every medical text available to me. Nothing matches this constellation of symptoms. It is as if Theodosia was struck by something entirely new to medical science. In another entry, he describes the psychological effects in greater detail. The auditory hallucinations reported by all patients followed a similar pattern. It begins as indistinct whispering or scratching, perceived as coming from the walls or floors. As the disease progresses, these sounds apparently become more distinct, described variously as voices speaking an unknown language, or the sound of something moving beneath the floorboards. In the final stages, patients become convinced that something is attempting to emerge from the wooden structures around them. This explains the frantic clawing observed. Elder Richardson, in his last coherent moments, described feeling that they're trying to get out of the wood and into us. I dismissed this as delirium at the time. Now I am not so certain. Whitaker became obsessed with identifying the cause. His journals detail his investigations into everything from the water supply to the grain processed at the Jensen mill. He even considered whether Union forces might have poisoned the community, though he eventually dismissed this theory due to Theodosia's strategic insignificance. The war has created shortages of many medical supplies, he noted, but I can find no connection between these shortages and what occurred. None of the remedies I administered had any effect whatsoever, neither positive nor negative. Whatever afflicted Theodosia, it progressed with a determination that no treatment could slow. In February 1863, Whitaker made a disturbing connection. In his journal, he writes, "I've been blind to what was before me all along. Every household affected consumed pork from the Abernethy farm. Their autumn slaughter occurred just 3 days before the first symptoms appeared. I myself did not partake, as Mrs. Peterson had gifted me venison that week. The Petersons, who raised their own pigs separately, showed symptoms last and least severely. This cannot be coincidence." This revelation led Whitaker back to Theodosia, despite warnings from Dr. Blackwood. He returned to investigate the Abernethy farm, accompanied by 2 deputies from Millbrook. What they discovered there was documented in both official records and Whitaker's final journal. The Abernethy barn held the answer. Whitaker wrote, "In the root cellar beneath, we found a substance unknown to me, a fungus of some sort, growing on the walls where they stored their butchered meat, black with hints of deep purple, releasing spores when disturbed. The deputies insisted on burning the structure immediately, but I managed to collect samples for examination. The growth pattern was unlike any fungus I've encountered, almost geometric in its precision, spreading in perfect branching patterns identical to the rash observed on the victims. Most unusual was its apparent affinity for the wood itself. It seemed to emerge from within the timber rather than growing upon its surface. The official report, filed by Deputy Marshal Hayes, describes the fungus as unnatural in appearance and movement. He notes that when a lantern was brought near, the growth appeared to recoil from the light, contracting visibly into the wood grain. Hayes insisted on burning not only the Abernethy barn, but all structures where deaths had occurred. According to county records, the settlement of Theodosia was systematically burned between February 15th and 17th, 1863. The official reason given was disease containment, though no specific pathogen was named in the documentation. Sheriff Wilson personally oversaw the operation, ensuring that every building was completely destroyed. The remains were buried under lime and soil. The samples Whitaker collected were sent to medical researchers in Philadelphia. The correspondence preserved in the archives of the Pennsylvania Medical Society indicates that the samples arrived, but results of any analysis have never been found. What is known is that shortly after sending the samples, Whitaker himself fell ill again, with symptoms matching those he had described in his patients. Unlike the others, however, Whitaker recovered a second time. His final journal entries, written in April 1863, suggest that his previous exposure had somehow granted him a degree of resistance. The affliction returned, but with less severity. The fever lasted only 2 days. The rash did not spread beyond my neck. I cannot explain this immunity, but I must document it for those who come after me. The auditory phenomena were present again, the whispering, the scratching, but I was able to resist the compulsion to respond to them. I wonder if complete immunity might be achieved through controlled exposure, though I would not dare risk such an experiment." Whitaker lived for another 3 years, during which time he relocated to Boston. He never practiced medicine again. According to Boston records, he became increasingly reclusive, dedicating himself to writing a comprehensive account of the Theodosia incident. This manuscript, mentioned in multiple letters to colleagues, has never been found. His landlady in Boston, Mrs. Eleanor Dyer, later reported that Whitaker kept his rooms unusually bare of wooden furniture, preferring metal whenever possible. He would not allow repairs to the wooden floors or walls, insisting that any damaged sections be removed entirely and replaced. He slept poorly, often claiming to hear noises in the walls. On May 17, 1866, Elias Whitaker was found dead in his apartment. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, though several witnesses reported seeing the distinctive rash on his neck at the funeral. His body was returned to Pennsylvania for burial in his family plot. According to cemetery records, he was buried in a metal coffin at his own prior request, rather than the traditional wooden casket. The settlement of Theodosia was never reoccupied. In the years following the incident, travelers reported that the land remained conspicuously empty of new growth. A survey conducted in 1870 noted that the burned area stayed unusually barren, with surrounding forest appearing reluctant to encroach upon the former settlement site. By 1880, county maps no longer showed Theodosia as an existing settlement. Local legends began to form around the abandoned site. Hunters reported disorientation when passing through the area. Some claimed to hear whispering sounds when no one was present. Others reported finding unusual black growths on trees near the former settlement. These accounts were generally dismissed as superstition, but they persisted for decades, passed down through generations of local families. The mystery of what exactly happened in Theodosia might have remained buried in obscure archives, if not for a chance discovery in 1952. During a geological survey of the area, researchers from Duke University came across the overgrown remains of the settlement. Despite the burning reported in historical records, stone foundations and partial wall structures remained identifiable. Among the ruins of what was identified as Dr. Whitaker's residence, a metal box was discovered containing his original journal from November 1862. The discovery coincided with increased academic interest in historical epidemics following advances in antibiotics and virology in the 1940s. Dr. Margaret Holloway, who led the research team that examined the journal, published a paper in the Journal of Historical Medicine in 1955 titled The Theodosia Affliction, Epidemic or Environmental Poisoning. In it, she proposed several theories based on Whitaker's descriptions, the most compelling being exposure to a previously unknown fungal toxin. The symptoms described by Dr. Whitaker, Holloway wrote, are consistent with mycotoxicosis, potentially from a strain of ergot or similar fungus. The confined spread, rapid onset, and near-total mortality rate suggest an extremely potent neurotoxin. The presence of auditory hallucinations before death is particularly significant, as it indicates central nervous system involvement. Modern parallels might include severe ergot poisoning or certain tropical fungal infections, though none match the exact symptom profile described. Holloway's research team attempted to locate the Abernethy farm site to collect soil samples, but the landscape had changed significantly in the intervening 90 years. Logging operations and natural forest reclamation had obscured many of the original landmarks. What they did find, however, was a circular area approximately half an acre in size where vegetation grew poorly. Soil analysis showed unusually high acidity and the presence of several compounds that could not be immediately identified with 1950s technology. What Holloway's published paper did not mention, but her private correspondence revealed, was that 2 members of her research team reported experiencing symptoms similar to those described in Whitaker's journal after extended exposure to the site. These symptoms resolved after they left the area, but both researchers declined to return for follow-up studies. In 1958, a more disturbing theory emerged. Dr. Harold Winters, a microbiologist with an interest in Civil War-era medicine, published an article suggesting the Theodosia incident might have been an early attempt at biological warfare. Confederate records indicate experiments with various toxins intended for water supply contamination, Winters wrote. While no direct evidence links these programs to Theodosia, the timing and unusual nature of the outbreak warrant consideration of deliberate introduction. The rapid onset, contained spread, and unique symptom profile align with what modern biological weapons researchers would consider an ideal agent, highly lethal, fast-acting, and self-limiting, to prevent uncontrolled spread. Winters cited documents from captured Confederate medical research facilities indicating that experiments with fungal toxins were conducted in 1861 and 1862. None of these experiments were officially deployed in combat, but Winters suggested that Theodosia might have been an unauthorized test case or an accidental release. This theory gained little traction among historians, who pointed out that Theodosia's remote location and minimal strategic importance made it an unlikely target. Additionally, Confederate records showed no military presence within 50 miles of the settlement during the relevant time period. Dr. Winters' academic reputation suffered following the publication, and he was largely dismissed as promoting conspiracy theories. Interestingly, he abandoned his research on the topic abruptly in 1959, after reportedly receiving an unusual black fungal sample from an anonymous source claiming connection to the Theodosia site. The most compelling investigation came in 1967, when Dr. James Skinner, a pathologist with an interest in historical epidemics, managed to obtain permission to exhume the remains of several Theodosia victims from a communal gravesite marked only by a simple stone with no inscription. The location had been identified through county burial records and confirmed with ground-penetrating radar. The exhumation process was documented in Skinner's research notes, which describe unusual difficulties. Equipment malfunctions occurred with surprising frequency. 3 camera failures, 2 incidents of unexplained static interference with recording equipment, and, most concerning, the mysterious illness that affected 2 members of the excavation team. Both reported fever and neck rash within 24 hours of opening the gravesite, though symptoms resolved without treatment after approximately 36 hours. Skinner's findings, published posthumously in 1969 after his unexpected death during the research process, revealed the presence of an unknown compound in the bone tissue of the victims. His notes described it as similar in structure to ergot alkaloids, but with molecular differences suggesting a previously undocumented fungal species. Most intriguing is the compound's apparent affinity for binding to neural tissue, which may explain the auditory hallucinations reported in historical accounts. Laboratory analysis detected traces of the compound not only in human remains, but also in fragments of wood found in the grave site. Skinner theorized that the wood itself might have been the vector for exposure, writing, "The fungus appears to have had a symbiotic relationship with the wood, perhaps using it as both substrate and amplification mechanism. If airborne spores were released during wood cutting or processing, this could explain the rapid community-wide exposure." Strangely, Skinner's complete research files disappeared shortly after his death. His assistant, Mary Reynolds, claimed they were collected by government representatives, though no record of such confiscation exists in official archives. Reynolds herself relocated to Europe shortly afterward and refused all interview requests regarding the Theodosia research. Dr. Skinner's death certificate lists the cause as heart failure, but his widow later claimed he had been experiencing symptoms similar to those he was researching in the weeks before his death. She reported that he had become convinced someone was following him and that he could hear something moving in the walls of their home. Medical authorities dismissed these claims as the understandable distress of a grieving spouse. The land where Theodosia once stood has remained uninhabited. In 1972, a hiking trail was proposed that would have passed through the former settlement site, but the project was abandoned after 3 surveyors reported falling ill with symptoms including fever and rash after spending time in the area. One surveyor, David Mercer, was hospitalized for 3 days. His medical records, obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 1988, note unexplained auditory hallucinations and dermatological inflammation consistent with severe allergic reaction to unknown environmental agent. The North Carolina Department of Natural Resources subsequently designated the area as a nature preserve, prohibiting development or extended human presence. The official reason cited was protection of rare bird species, but internal memos obtained through Freedom of Information requests in 1968 reference ongoing environmental concerns related to historical contamination and unusual biological activity inconsistent with standard forest ecology. A 1975 aerial survey of the area revealed an anomaly that has never been fully explained. Photographs show a nearly perfect circular pattern of stunted growth approximately 300 yards in diameter, centered on what would have been the Theodosia settlement. Within this circle, vegetation appears visibly different, darker and more dense than the surrounding forest, yet composed of different species. Botanical analysis conducted remotely identified several fungal species not typically found in the region. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Theodosia incident is how effectively it has been forgotten. Despite claiming 31 lives in a manner that defied medical explanation, it receives virtually no mention in Civil War-era medical literature or historical accounts of the period. Even comprehensive studies of 19th-century epidemics typically omit the case entirely. Dr. Elizabeth Chambers, who studied the incident while researching her 1965 book on forgotten epidemics, offered this observation: "History remembers what we choose to remember." The Theodosia affliction represents something medical science of the 1860s could neither explain nor treat. Rather than confront this failure, the medical establishment of the time seems to have collectively agreed to look away. More concerning is the continued reluctance of modern researchers to investigate thoroughly. I've encountered unusual resistance when attempting to access certain archives related to the case, suggesting that something about this incident remains sensitive even a century later. The few researchers who have investigated the incident in depth have noted peculiar obstacles. Records go missing or prove difficult to access. Locations become suddenly restricted. And in at least 3 documented cases, researchers themselves have reported symptoms reminiscent of those described by Dr. Whitaker. In 1966, historian Thomas Reed abandoned his book project on Theodosia after being hospitalized with what he described as a rash that begins at the neck and spreads outward. His manuscript and research notes were reportedly destroyed in a house fire the following year. Fire department reports note the unusual intensity of the blaze and its apparent origin in Reed's study, where he kept his Theodosia materials. Reed later gave only one interview about his experience to a small local newspaper in 1968. In it, he states, "I came to believe that knowledge of Theodosia carries its own risk. There are some historical events that resist investigation, as if the very act of remembering them brings them partially back into existence. I will not be pursuing this research further, and I advise others to let this particular sleeping dog lie." What's particularly striking about the Theodosia case is the pattern that emerges when one examines the timeline of investigations. Approximately every 30 years, interest in the incident resurfaces, only to be suddenly abandoned. After Skinner's work in the late 1960s, the next significant research attempt occurred in 1997, when mycologist Dr. Vivian Palmer obtained permission to analyze soil samples from the area. Palmer's preliminary findings were presented at a symposium in Atlanta, where she described discovering spore structures unlike any cataloged fungal species. According to attendees, she appeared visibly disturbed during her presentation, frequently losing her train of thought and complaining of auditory disturbances. One colleague described her as constantly distracted, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Her presentation included electron microscope images of the unusual spores, which showed geometric patterns that one audience member, Dr. Robert Shen, later described as almost mathematical in their precision, not consistent with typical natural growth patterns. These images were omitted from the published proceedings, allegedly due to quality concerns. 2 weeks later, Palmer canceled her research project, citing personal health concerns. She resigned her university position and moved to New Mexico, where she refused all interview requests about her work. Her soil samples were reportedly destroyed in a laboratory accident, though several colleagues disputed this claim off the record. One laboratory technician, speaking anonymously to a science journalist in 1999, claimed the samples had been confiscated by individuals claiming to represent the CDC, though no official record of such action exists. In 2001, a documentary filmmaker attempting to locate Palmer for an interview discovered that she had apparently left New Mexico without leaving a forwarding address. Local residents reported that before her departure, she had become increasingly paranoid, covering all wooden surfaces in her home with plastic sheeting and claiming to hear noises in the walls at night. The isolation of Theodosia was likely a key factor in containing whatever struck the settlement. Had the affliction appeared in a more connected community, the death toll might have been catastrophic. This geographic containment may explain the relative historical obscurity of the incident. It never developed into a widespread threat requiring national attention. But for those who have studied the case, questions linger. What exactly was the black fungus Whitaker described in the Abernethy root cellar? Why did it affect him differently during his second exposure? And perhaps most disturbing, could it still exist in the forests around the former settlement? In 2008, a mycology graduate student named Michael Thornton attempted to conduct research on unusual fungal species in the Blue Ridge Mountains. His field notes, later recovered from his abandoned campsite, mention finding black growth with purple undertones on fallen timber near the coordinates corresponding to Theodosia's location. The final entry, dated May 12, 2008, reads, "The growth responds to sound. When I speak near it, it seems to orient toward me. I'm recording this behavior on my camera." Neither Thornton nor his camera was ever found, despite an extensive search by local authorities. In 2012, a routine environmental survey conducted by the state of North Carolina produced an anomalous reading in the area. The details were classified, but a technician involved in the survey later reported seeing a black growth with purple undertones on certain trees in the vicinity. This technician requested a transfer the following week and declined to return to the site. His supervisor noted in personnel records that he had become convinced the trees were listening to him, a comment that led to his referral for psychological evaluation. The most recent documented incident occurred in 2018, when a group of hikers strayed off marked trails and camped near the former settlement site. 2 days after returning home, all 4 members of the group developed fever and distinctive neck rashes. One hiker, Lisa Myers, was hospitalized when she began reporting whispering sounds coming from wooden furniture. Her symptoms resolved after treatment with broad-spectrum antifungal medications, a treatment approach that had not been attempted in previous cases. This successful treatment prompted renewed medical interest in the Theodosia phenomenon. Dr. Jason Park, an infectious disease specialist who treated Myers, published a case study suggesting that the affliction might be caused by a previously unidentified fungal pathogen with neurotropic properties. He proposed that the auditory hallucinations could result from the fungus-producing compounds similar to psychoactive alkaloids when metabolizing wood. Dr. Park attempted to organize a research expedition to collect samples from the area in 2019. His grant applications were denied by multiple funding agencies despite his impressive credentials and preliminary results. In a blog post later removed from his university's website, Park expressed frustration at the inexplicable resistance he encountered from normally supportive colleagues and institutions. The Theodosia affliction represents a peculiar gap in our understanding, a case where modern science might provide answers, yet investigations repeatedly stall or disappear. It stands as a reminder that even in our age of medical advancement, there remain mysteries that resist explanation. Dr. Whitaker's final journal entry, dated April 30, 1863, reads, "I am leaving this place tomorrow, never to return. But I fear what happened here will not remain buried. The land remembers, and beneath the soil, unseen, things continue to grow. What troubles me most is not what I know, but what I suspect, that the affliction that struck Theodosia was not new. The patterns in the fungus, too perfect to be natural, suggest deliberate design, and the way it spread through wood, as if the timber itself had become a conduit. I wonder now about old stories of cursed forests and houses where the walls whispered. Perhaps our ancestors knew something we have forgotten. Perhaps some knowledge is better left lost. The forest has reclaimed Theodosia completely now. No buildings remain visible. The exact location is marked on few maps. But occasionally, hikers in the Blue Ridge Mountains report becoming disoriented in a certain valley where the air feels heavier and sounds seem muffled. Some describe a ringing in their ears that persists for days afterward, and local doctors in the counties surrounding the former settlement still occasionally encounter patients with an unusual rash that begins at the neck and spreads outward like branches. Most cases are mild, resolving within days. But medical records show that once every few decades a more severe case appears, and in those instances, the attending physicians often note that the patient reported hearing voices or sounds with no apparent source. The last such case was documented in 1997, coinciding with Dr. Palmer's abandoned research. If the pattern holds true, the affliction that haunted Theodosia may soon make itself known again. One local physician, Dr. Rebecca Hayes, who has maintained an unofficial record of such cases since the 1970s, notes a disturbing trend. The intervals between clusters of cases appear to be shortening. Where once we might see cases every 30 years or so, the gap has reduced to approximately 20 years now. And the severity seems to be increasing. In 1958, a journalist attempting to locate Theodosia interviewed an elderly resident of Millbrook who claimed his grandfather had been part of the group that discovered the aftermath of the incident. The journalist's notes include this quote, "Granddad said it wasn't just that they were dead. It was how they died, all reaching toward the sky like they were trying to climb away from something on the ground. And their faces. He wouldn't describe their faces, not even after 60 years. Just said that whatever they saw at the end, it wasn't of this world. He never slept in a wooden house again after that. Built himself a stone cabin and lined the inside with clay. People thought he was crazy, but he always said, 'Wood remembers,' and sometimes it shares those memories." In 1982, a dendrochronologist studying tree ring patterns in the Blue Ridge Mountains made an unusual discovery. Trees growing within a certain radius of the former settlement showed abnormal growth rings corresponding to the years 1862-1863. Instead of the typical circular pattern, the rings formed complex branching structures reminiscent of neural networks. When these findings were submitted to a forestry journal, the paper was rejected without explanation. The researchers' raw data and samples were subsequently lost in a laboratory fire. Some mysteries are perhaps better left unexplored. But for those who seek to understand what happened in that remote mountain settlement, a warning from Dr. Whitaker's journal seems particularly apt. There are afflictions of the body, and then there are afflictions of a place. I fear Theodosia suffers from the latter, and such ailments do not resolve with time. They merely wait, dormant, for the right conditions to return. The forest grows thick over the former settlement now. The land shows no physical scars from the tragedy that unfolded there, but locals still avoid the area, particularly in autumn when the wind shifts and carries the scent of decay from the deeper woods. They say nothing grows quite right in that valley. Plants reaching in unusual directions, fungi appearing in patterns that seem almost deliberate. And on certain nights, when the air is still and heavy with moisture, those camping in the surrounding mountains report hearing something that sounds almost like voices. 31 voices, calling out in unison from the direction of what was once Theodosia. In 2005, a team from the University of Georgia's Department of Plant Pathology attempted to catalog fungal species in the region as part of a broader biodiversity study. Their research was unrelated to the Theodosia incident. Indeed, none of the team members were apparently aware of the historical events. Their field notes, subsequently obtained through academic database access, contain a curious entry dated June 17, 2005. Unusual fungal colony observed in isolated valley, black with purple hues, growing in geometric patterns unlike typical mycelial networks. Sample collection attempted but proved difficult as the organism appears to retreat into wood substrate when disturbed. 3 team members reported skin irritation after contact with affected trees. The team's final report, published in 2006, makes no mention of this observation. When contacted by later researchers, the team leader, Dr. Alan Morrison, claimed to have no recollection of encountering any unusual fungal species during the expedition. 2 other team members similarly denied any memory of the incident described in their own field notes. The 4th member of the team, graduate student Jennifer Collins, could not be reached for comment. University records indicate she withdrew from her program shortly after returning from the field study, citing personal reasons. A 2013 satellite imaging study of forest density in the Blue Ridge Mountains captured what appears to be an anomaly in the area corresponding to Theodosia's location. The imagery shows a near-perfect circle of altered vegetation, approximately 1/4 mile in diameter. Within this circle, infrared readings indicate significantly different biological activity compared to surrounding forest. When these findings were flagged for further investigation, the research project was unexpectedly defunded. The records of what happened there may be incomplete, scattered across archives, or lost to time. But the land remembers, and perhaps, in some way, we cannot fully comprehend, so do those who perished there in November of 1862, their final moments preserved in some echo between history and nightmare. In 2015, folklorist Dr. Sarah Martinez conducted interviews with elderly residents of communities near the former Theodosia site, collecting oral histories and local legends. One recurring motif in these stories was the concept of wood sickness. According to multiple independent accounts, older generations warned against using fallen timber from certain areas of the forest, claiming it would make the walls of your house whisper. One 92-year-old resident recalled his grandmother's warning, "Some trees drink from poisoned ground. Build with that wood, and you build with what killed Theodosia." Martinez attempted to trace the etymology of local terms for this phenomenon, discovering that several indigenous languages from the region had words describing wood that listens or timber that remembers voices. These concepts predated European settlement by centuries, suggesting that whatever occurred in Theodosia might have had earlier manifestations. Her research was compiled into a manuscript titled Whispering Walls, the Folklore of Infectious Architecture in Appalachia, which was accepted for publication by University Press in 2016. 1 week before the scheduled printing, Martinez withdrew the manuscript without explanation. Colleagues report that she had become convinced her home was infected after bringing wood samples from the research area into her office. She reportedly stripped all wooden furniture from her house and began sleeping in a tent in her yard. Her current whereabouts are unknown. What cannot be disputed is that 31 people died in a single night in a remote mountain settlement, leaving only one survivor to tell their story. And that story, of an affliction that came suddenly, killed efficiently, and then disappeared just as mysteriously, continues to resist explanation more than a century and a half later. In 2019, a mycological researcher with the CDC, Dr. Robert Chen, reviewed historical cases of fungal outbreaks while developing protocols for emerging pathogen response. His internal report, later obtained through a Freedom of Information request, includes a section on the Theodosia incident. Chen writes, "The symptom profile and transmission pattern described in historical accounts does not match any known fungal pathogen. However, recent advances in our understanding of fungal neurotoxins and mycelial communication networks suggest a theoretical possibility for a fungus that could produce the reported effects. Of particular interest is the apparent affinity for wood and the auditory hallucinations, which might be explained by an organism capable of producing DMT-like compounds when metabolizing certain types of timber. Chen recommended a field investigation with modern equipment and protocols, but his recommendation was denied by senior officials. The stated reason was resource allocation priorities, though Chen later claimed in a professional blog that he was directly instructed to leave Theodosia in the past. 6 months after submitting his report, Chen was reassigned to a different department with no involvement in mycological research. Perhaps that is what makes the Theodosia affliction truly terrifying. Not the death toll, substantial though it was, not the gruesome symptoms described in Whitaker's journal, but rather the implication that sometimes the natural world harbors threats beyond our understanding, threats that can emerge without warning, strike without mercy, and then retreat without explanation, leaving us to wonder when, not if, they might return. The pattern of cyclical reemergence approximately every 30 years suggests a biological cycle rather than random occurrence. Dr. James Mitchell, an epidemiologist who reviewed the historical record in a 2020 paper published in the Journal of Historical Epidemiology, proposed that the organism responsible might have a dormancy phase similar to certain fungal species that can remain inactive for decades before producing fruiting bodies under specific environmental conditions. If we accept the fungal hypothesis, Mitchell wrote, then the 30-year cycle might correspond to environmental triggers such as rainfall patterns, temperature fluctuations, or even solar activity cycles. What's concerning is that climate change may be altering these cycles, potentially shortening the dormancy periods or expanding the geographic range where the organism can become active. Mitchell's paper represents the most comprehensive academic review of the Theodosia case to date, compiling evidence from diverse sources and applying modern epidemiological analysis. Yet even this scholarly approach encountered unexpected resistance. Mitchell reports that 3 co-authors withdrew from the project before publication, 2 citing methodological concerns and 1 offering no explanation. The journal initially rejected the paper despite positive peer reviews, accepting it only after Mitchell appealed directly to the editorial board. In the conclusion of his paper, Mitchell observes, "The Theodosia affliction represents a unique case study in how scientific investigation can be systematically undermined, not through active suppression, but through a kind of institutional apathy that manifests whenever this topic is raised. This resistance to inquiry itself becomes part of the phenomenon worthy of study. The clock is ticking. By the pattern established over generations, the time for the affliction's reappearance draws near. And somewhere in the forests of western North Carolina, in a valley that no longer appears on most maps, something may already be growing in the dark, fertile soil where Theodosia once stood." In October 2021, 3 hikers were reported missing after deviating from marked trails in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Search and rescue operations located their campsite after 4 days. The tent was found intact with all personal belongings inside, but no sign of the hikers themselves. The only unusual element noted in official reports was abnormal fungal growth on several trees surrounding the campsite. Samples were reportedly collected by park rangers, but the results of any analysis have not been made public. 2 months later, one of the missing hikers, Michael Torres, was found walking along a highway nearly 30 miles from the campsite. According to medical records, he was severely dehydrated and disoriented, with a distinctive rash on his neck and upper chest. He had no memory of what happened to his companions or how he had become separated from them. The other 2 hikers remain missing. During his hospitalization, Torres repeatedly complained of hearing whispering sounds, particularly at night. Hospital staff initially attributed this to dehydration-induced hallucinations, But nursing notes indicate that the auditory phenomena persisted even after his physical condition stabilized. One nurse reported that Torres became increasingly agitated in rooms with wooden furniture, at one point attempting to barricade himself in a bathroom with predominantly metal fixtures. Torres was eventually transferred to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. The attending psychiatrist, Dr. Elaine Fisher, noted similarities between Torres's symptoms and historical accounts of the Theodosia affliction. When she attempted to access historical medical records related to the case for comparison, she encountered what she described as extraordinary administrative obstacles. Her request for consultation with CDC specialists was denied without explanation. In January 2022, Torres was abruptly discharged from the psychiatric facility and transported to a private research hospital in Maryland. No further information about his condition or treatment has been made public, and attempts by family members to contact him have been unsuccessful. Dr. Fisher was placed on administrative leave shortly after filing a formal complaint about Torres's case management. The search for the remaining 2 hikers was officially suspended in February 2022. Park authorities maintain that they likely succumbed to exposure, though no bodies have been recovered. Strangely, the section of forest where their campsite was located has since been designated as restricted for ongoing environmental research, with no additional details provided. Local residents report increased government presence in the area, with unmarked vehicles and personnel in hazmat-style protective gear seen accessing the restricted zone. Official requests for information about these activities have been met with form responses citing routine environmental monitoring. As this investigation concludes, the Theodosia affliction remains a historical footnote to most, a forgotten tragedy overshadowed by the larger conflicts of its time. But for those who have followed the trail of evidence across generations, it represents something far more disturbing, a recurring phenomenon that modern science seems reluctant or unable to confront directly. In the words of Dr. Whitaker, written over a century and a half ago, "I fear this is not the end, but merely a dormant phase. What emerged in Theodosia will emerge again when conditions align. And next time, it may not remain contained to one small settlement." For now, the forests of western North Carolina grow thick and green, beautiful in their ancient majesty. Hikers traverse marked trails, unaware of what may lie just beyond the ridge. And in certain areas, if you listen carefully on still nights, local guides say you can hear something like distant voices, carried on the wind, 31 voices, calling out a warning that has gone unheeded for generations. The question remains, when the Theodosia affliction returns, as historical patterns suggest it soon will modern medicine be prepared to confront what 19th century science could not? Or will 30 more voices join the chorus that whispers through the ancient forests, warning of dangers that hide in plain sight, growing silently in the wood around us? As one local saying goes, the mountains keep their secrets, but sometimes those secrets don't stay buried.